There's a lot of talk coming from Washington insiders that tax increases are unavoidable because budget deficits are too large. Since these almost always are the same people who constantly vote for more spending, this Center for Freedom and Prosperity video could focus on their hypocrisy, but let's instead actually look at what it would take to balance the budget without higher taxes. I'm Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute. Thanks for being part of this conversation. Before looking at the numbers, let's first remind ourselves that balancing the budget should not be the main goal. As we explained in a previous video, America's fiscal policy challenge is too much spending. Deficits are just a symptom of that problem. Let's dig into the numbers. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the federal government this year is spending almost $3.5 trillion. Tax receipts are estimated to be less than $2.2 trillion, which leaves a projected deficit of about $1.35 trillion. So how do we balance the budget when there is that much red ink? Well, the easy answer is to limit the federal government to those activities authorized by the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 lists all the allowable roles of the federal government, including things ranging from national defense to post offices. Nowhere on the list, though, is there a Department of Agriculture, energy subsidy programs, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Small Business Administration, Department of Education, National Endowment for the Arts, or Department of Transportation. If we get rid of all the departments that don't fulfill the requirements of Article 1, Section 8, we can balance the budget overnight. Indeed, it's worth pointing out that for much of America's history, back in the days when the Constitution was respected, the burden of federal spending averaged only 3% of economic output. If we did the same thing today, federal spending would be less than $450 billion. We'd not only have a balanced budget, we'd have a giant surplus and could easily afford to abolish the income tax. Now that's what I call hope and change. Unfortunately, the vast majority of politicians don't really care about the Constitution, even though they take an oath to uphold it. So let's be more modest in our goals and see whether we can balance the budget without tax increases using more conventional means. Many fans of big government are fond of saying how everything was wonderful back during the Clinton years. I actually agree with them if my only other choices are the big spending policies of Bush and Obama, but that's a separate issue. Let's look at federal spending when Clinton left office, about $1.86 trillion. And even if we adjust the spending levels from Clinton's last year for inflation and population, total spending would still be less than $2.5 trillion, which would mean a deficit of less than 2.5% of GDP. And if federal spending only grew at the rate of inflation and population from that point forward, we'd have a budget surplus in just 2 years. Now, even though this is a very reasonable thing to ask, the politicians doubtlessly will claim it is impossible to bring spending back to where it was when Clinton left office. So let's now examine what would happen if we accepted the current level of government spending as a given and simply asked politicians to be responsible in the future. As you can see on the screen, if spending is simply capped at the current level with a hard freeze, the budget is balanced by 2016. And if we limit spending growth to 1% each year, the budget is balanced in 2017. And if we allow 2% annual spending growth, which would be about what is needed for population growth and inflation based on CBO estimates, the budget balances in 2020. Now, by the way, these estimates all assume that the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts are made permanent, and they assume the alternative minimum tax is adjusted for inflation. So here's the bottom line. Balancing the budget is not difficult. Even when we use numbers from the Congressional Budget Office, getting rid of red ink is very achievable with modest levels of fiscal restraint. Obviously, we can and should do much more than simply limit the growth of federal spending. But remember, this video is designed to simply deal with the false assertion that we can't balance the budget without tax hikes. Let's conclude by exposing how politicians dishonestly manipulate the budget process. How many times have you seen stories or heard politicians say that we would need trillions of dollars of spending cuts to balance the budget? Yet we just looked at CBO numbers showing that we could balance the budget relatively quickly by limiting spending growth. This disconnect is the result of something called the current services or baseline budget. The politicians in Washington put together budgets by first assuming that all previously planned spending increases should occur. And if somehow spending doesn't grow as fast as they planned, they get to say that spending has been cut. That's sort of like assuming you're going to get a 10% pay hike, and when your boss gives you a 4% pay hike, you start crying and complaining because your pay was cut by 6%. Sounds absurd, but that's actually how the budget works in the strange world of Washington. The politicians set up this dishonest system so they could have their cake and eat it too. They get to give more money to the special interest groups while simultaneously telling voters that they're cutting spending. They love this scam, but this is one of the reasons why America is suffering from bloated and wasteful government spending. Restoring fiscal discipline will be a challenge. Interest groups that are used to big budget increases will be upset if spending growth is limited to 1% or 2% each year. It means entitlements will need to be reformed. It means, at least hopefully, that we get rid of programs and departments that are not legitimate functions of the federal government. You better believe that these changes will cause a lot of squealing by the lobbyists and other insiders. All you need to understand, though, is that tax increases are not needed to balance the budget. That's the core message of this video. The politicians want more of our money so they can maintain a corrupt system that is leading our country down the path of becoming a Greek-style welfare state. Stopping tax hikes is not a sufficient condition to save our country from a fiscal collapse, but it sure is a necessary condition. You can do your part by sharing this video widely. On behalf of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, thanks for your help.